We've already had so many opportunities to sell Bitcoin. So many chances when people said, hey, now comes the mega crash. I mean, just look at this chart, and the fact is there's a lot of talk around it. We don't like that. We like hard facts. That's why today we're talking about this crypto market, discussing a bit about what's really wrong here, or rather what's truly different this time. First, we'll look at the differences, then we'll examine outdated signals, and finally we'll look at 3 truths that are genuinely different this time. And there are definitely things here that most people tend to forget, but this time they really are a bit different. But before we continue, make sure to leave a like and a comment, because of course this video also took a lot of work. So let's take a look at the differences. If we stack all the cycles on top of each other, we see that the cycles actually run relatively similarly. But this cycle so far is a bit weaker compared to the other cycles. And this mainly refers to Bitcoin. Altcoins aren't even included in this comparison. With altcoins, the difference is actually even a bit greater. When it comes to Bitcoin dominance, we also see really significant differences here. We can observe from cycle to cycle that the altcoin season keeps getting shorter, the recovery phase keeps getting longer, and right now we're once again heading towards a situation where the altcoin season will be shorter, but probably more explosive in relation to the number of months. That's how things look at the moment, but we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in just a moment. Because everyone knows that at the moment, altcoins aren't exactly performing spectacularly. Sure, there are a few exceptions here and there, but overall, the last few months haven't been particularly good for altcoins. If we look at Bitcoin, we can clearly see that this time, Bitcoin is behaving completely differently compared to the last cycle. In the last cycle, it rose steadily really nicely. There was a nice summer correction, but then it climbed again. So it was kind of a double top. Right now, we're moving up in steps, bit by bit by bit. We tested the 50 EMA 3 times here. Back then, we tested it once, had a breakout here, and then we saw another double top. This time, things are really different. And now we are climbing in steps. But there's also a huge advantage here. And the big advantage is that by doing this, we continuously remove selling potential from the market, which in turn increases the potential for the next upward trend. This chart refers entirely to retail investors. Here, Bitcoin has performed well for now. A bit of retail money entered the market. Then we had the second phase here. This is exactly the phase where we rose to $108,000. Take a look on $108,000. Really impressive. A bit of retail came in, but then this long sideways phase followed. Currently we're at $105,000, so basically at the same level, but look at how little retail is in the market here. That's the advantage. Here, this selling potential was completely removed from the market. As a result, in the long term, we simply have much higher chances for growth. So in the long run, it's actually really good how this cycle has gone so far. And now let's talk about these 3 truths that simply need to be addressed here. First of all, the altcoin season is not guaranteed. And yes, we have to be honest, the altcoin season really isn't guaranteed. We always speculate about it, talk about it, but nothing is guaranteed here. The altcoin window of opportunity is getting narrower and narrower. According to timeframes and data, we should see our bull market top by October or November of this year at the latest, and then transition into a bear market. At least that's the case if you compare it to previous years. Looking at Bitcoin dominance, it's clear. The window of opportunity is getting tighter and tighter. If the altcoin season were to start today, we would only have 4 or 5 months left for the altcoin season. Compared to previous cycles, that's significantly less time for an altcoin season. And the longer this gets delayed, the shorter the altcoin season will be. That's something you need to understand here. The window of opportunity is getting tighter and tighter every day, right now. Of course, that doesn't mean we won't see an altcoin season, but we just have to address this openly because we're being rational here. We're not emotional, we're rational, and we also talk about things that might be different here or maybe even a bit worse. Some altcoins are close to their bear market lows, even though Bitcoin has performed really well. That's a clear fact. Projects that are in the top 10, for example, Algorand from the last cycle, are so far from their previous all-time highs. It's unimaginable. We're really almost at an all-time low here, while Bitcoin has performed extremely well so far. I mean, just look at Bitcoin here. Here was our cycle top at 21.0. We're currently way above that. With the altcoins, we're still extremely far from the cycle top of 21.0. This is just the altcoin chart here. Take a look at this. There's still a huge gap before we've even broken the 2021 top here. So in comparison, the altcoins aren't actually performing that well. Bitcoin dominance continues to rise while we're not seeing a major altcoin rotation here. That has to be said as well. Bitcoin dominance is steadily increasing here, and we're not really seeing this reallocation. But it should be noted that in the past it was relatively similar. We see individual projects that rise sharply, but they also fall very, very quickly and steeply. And only a few specific narratives are performing well. That's also what I've shown you several times before. We might have a meme narrative that does really well for 3 weeks, but then it gets heavily sold off again. And then maybe the AI narrative takes over. And that's just a bit different from how it was in the past. The second truth is simply that institutional investors are basically the new retail these days. We don't have much retail in the market, but this time we do have institutional investors. It's incredible. It kind of looks like we're not getting the same retail participation as in previous years, at least at the current point in time. Although I do think that in the long run, the institutions will make sure that more retail comes into the market. But back then, we already had a lot of retail in the market, and because of those massive crashes in the past, a lot of people have just been scared off. At least that's how it currently looks. What also needs to be said is that institutional money is naturally flowing more into Bitcoin and Ethereum because of the ETFs. By now, that's $130 billion that have flowed into the Bitcoin ETFs alone. We really have some big institutional investors here who are seriously buying up only Bitcoin or Ethereum in large amounts, but I have to step in right here. Back in 2021, we also had major players like Tesla, MicroStrategy, and so on, who were already making big purchases at the time, and yet we still saw this rotation. It could be that the rotation is a bit smaller in comparison, but overall, it's probably going to be relatively similar, and it might even end up being bigger than in 2021. The next major point. We simply have way too many cryptocurrencies on the market, and the money has to be spread across multiple cryptos. And that's absolutely true. According to CoinMarketCap, we now have almost 17 million cryptocurrencies, so way too many. You can also see here how sharply that number is currently rising. Every month, we're getting way too many new cryptos entering the market. Naturally, the money has to be distributed among more cryptos as a result. But to be completely honest, most of them launch at $0 anyway. They don't get any share of the pie anyway. So this is also an argument that is somewhat valid, but in my opinion, it's usually weighed a bit too heavily. As a result, altcoins ultimately don't get much liquidity, and the big players tend to go for the safer bets here. But in the end, that's also kind of the second point. And the third truth is that the 4-year cycle is playing out differently than expected. The halving impact is significantly weaker than in the past. By now, we've mined almost 95% of all Bitcoins, so the impact of the halving just isn't as big anymore. Because of the ETFs, we already broke the old Bitcoin high too early. You can see that here. Around the time of the halving, we had already broken our all-time high with Bitcoin. We've never seen anything like that in the past. Never before have we broken our all-time high before the halving. That means we kind of moved up a bit too early this time. But as I said, that's simply because in this cycle we're climbing in steps rather than all at once. The institutional investors are investing a bit differently than retail investors or how it was in previous years. Because now we simply have the big Wall Street players in the market and they just operate a bit more professionally. That means in any case, this volatility is decreasing here. Bitcoin is rising more slowly, but as a result, it has a steady upward trend, though no longer those really big rallies, no longer that crypto explosion we saw in the past. And of course, we are definitely seeing that right now. We're climbing up here step by step. And not like back then, where in 5 months, bam, 3, 4, 500%. No, here it's step by step by step, like climbing stairs. That's simply because we have these institutional players now, and they're doing this on purpose, since in this cycle we already have 3 to 4 times more trading volume than in the last cycle, and the market makers are taking advantage of that. They make the most money during these market phases. They're deliberately stretching out this cycle so they can make even more money here. That's the big difference, because we've already been on the verge of this overheated zone twice, as you can clearly see here. But they held us back again. They pushed us back down here again, just to make sure we don't enter the overheated zone. Because when Bitcoin is in the overheated zone, that's when, for example, we also break the P-cycle top indicator or other indicators. And that's exactly when the money always gets shifted around. And so far we haven't seen that. But now here's my complete conclusion on all these topics. This cycle is of course a bit different, which is completely normal. Things can't always play out exactly the same way. By now we simply have an extremely large number of companies involved here. Just take a look at this. Here we have 34 companies that have now bought up Bitcoins for several $1 million. And that's simply a huge difference compared to previous years. We have bigger players in the market now. Of course, not everything can play out the same way as always here either. If everything did play out the same, then everyone would already know how it ends. And that's why things are a bit different this time. But even these institutions are not an obstacle. That's simply an additional option. Even in 2021, we had a huge altcoin season, despite Tesla, despite Facebook, and so on, who were only focused on Bitcoin. We still had a massive altcoin season. That's something you shouldn't forget. And I believe it will be the same this time. I'm very optimistic about that. But rationally speaking, it doesn't have to turn out that way. Nevertheless, I still believe in it. But the fact is, especially during the altcoin season, that over time and according to the data, we have less and less room, less and less leeway. And if the altcoin season were to start now, we would have significantly less time until the bull run top with the altcoin season than we did in the past. That's simply a fact. That just needs to be addressed here, and I don't want to lie to you about it. As a result, this euphoria phase will be shorter, but much more aggressive and much faster. But of course, that probably also means a bigger crash will follow. We would have to look at all of that in retrospect. At least that's how it looks at the moment. Otherwise, I'm still optimistic that we will see an altcoin season and that we will see a cycle top towards the end of the year, just like in the past. I still stick to the 4-year cycle, even though of course there are certain differences this time. But that's just part of it. As I said, things can't always go the same way. Once again, this was a video that took a lot of work, and I hope you simply appreciate that effort. Give the video a like and leave a comment, and see you next time. Bye.